Public dialogue and civic engagement are important. They play a role in improving the health and well-being of Texans across our great state. That's why Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Texas is proud to support Texas Tribune events like the conversation you're about to see.
Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Poncho Nevárez and the Honorable Carlos Uresti.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Nice to be
Thanks,
with
Evan.
you on your home turf. It's a home game for you. It's an away game for me. That's okay. Happy to be able to come and ask questions relevant to this community. And I want to begin by asking about health care. So as you both know, for years and years in the all funds budget of the state of Texas, education was the #1 line item. We spent more money on education than anything else in the state of Texas. No close second. But in the last couple of years, healthcare costs have risen in the state to the point that in the current budget, the 2-year budget that started last September 1st, healthcare costs have risen to equal, or by some measures, pass, for the first time ever, education. The healthcare costs in this state are hockey sticking. We have 5 million people without health insurance in this state, and many people in this community do not have access to health insurance. But you all, from what I can tell, did absolutely nothing on healthcare last session. Representative, why?
I mean, I'd like to think that, well, I'd like to say or believe that we had more pressing things, but the truth is we didn't. We didn't, or we shouldn't have had anything more pressing than getting after this issue. And the statistics that you're giving about the expenditures, I think we're over a third or close to maybe even half of the budget going to Medicaid expenses. And that's a function of the population getting a little bit older, you know, baby boomers coming through. And not prioritizing, I think, healthcare providers because they're not incentivized to prioritize prevention and taking care of people so they don't get sicker and we don't spend the money going down the road. But I really believe, and I'll use the royal we when I talk about we, the legislature, we didn't get after healthcare because we were chasing around things that, in my opinion, are just not worth the time or the effort. And I suspect we'll be doing that in the 85th. We're already seeing...
Say what those things were very quickly. What are a couple things that we spent time on that we shouldn't have spent time on?
I mean, we spent a lot of political capital on this border security bill and a lot of time when it really was something that... And believe me, I literally live right on the river. So I understand border security from a very practical standpoint. But I don't believe we should have spent $800 million and months just talking about this and trying to fix a bill that, when it, in its infancy, came out and was terrible. And then we had a couple more bills that were, one that was decided by the Supreme Court regarding same-sex marriage, that, you know, anybody with half a brain that had gone to law school could already see this coming. And we talked to some of our colleagues and said, look, the high court's going to decide this. We don't need to be messing around and wasting time. And yet we did that.
So we could have been talking about health care, but instead we're talking about those.
Yes.
Senator Uresti, third-term Poncho is a relative newbie to the legislature. You've been in the legislature for a long time. You know this is not a new problem. We didn't suddenly become a state where health care costs were an issue or where we had a high population of uninsured overnight.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Evan, as you know, I served in the House for 9 years. I sat on Public Health Committee most of that time. I was the chair of Human Services in the House. In the Senate for the last 10 years or so, I've sat on the Health and Human Services Committee. So absolutely, some of us have been talking about this issue and how we need to get ahead of it. We've got a growing population, you know, a number of kids, millions of kids that are uninsured. And what I've been trying to convince my colleagues to listen to and to actually do something about is the prevention part of it. And I just don't understand why we won't put not more money, but shift some of the money into the prevention part.
What do you mean prevention on the front end before people get sick? Is that
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. Tobacco, smoking, cigarettes. I've tried to raise the smoking limit from 18 to 19 or to 21 for the last 15 years. Because studies have proven that if you can prevent somebody from ever start smoking, from ever beginning to smoke, even by 1 year, the chances of that person starting to smoke decrease.
Right.
What we're paying in smoking-related illnesses are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's just one little example, but it's a big example of how we can put our arms around the expanding cost of healthcare. I mean, it's tremendous.
Senator, you know that the response often to this conversation is, well, people who don't have health insurance can go to the emergency room.
which
they
costs
can-
9 times more.
Right, well, it's free to them, but it's not free to the rest of us.
Right.
It's not free to the taxpayers. It costs
Right.
9 times more than a regular visit.
Right. Representative Nevárez, the presidential election is not going to be inconsequential in this conversation. What you hear out of Austin is, well, we're hoping we elect a Republican, Ted Cruz or Donald Trump or somebody, who will come in and unmake the Affordable Care Act so that we can somehow get our kind of solution in there. Basically, we're on pause until we see who the president's going to be in January 2017.
I think the problem with that is that every time you've heard that conversation that just wait till we, undo Obamacare, with what? I mean, never in that conversation do you hear this is how it's going to work. This is what we're going to do. This is what's better about it. And again, I'm not smarter than anybody else, but it tells me that the only reason they're attacking this is because it's President Obama's idea.
But Representative, they say that the Medicaid system is broken, that it's not working. And certainly there are things about the Medicaid system that could be better, could be working better. And so the argument is, why pour a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of people into a system that's broken? You're throwing bad money after worse.
Well, at a minimum, one of the issues with, again, the Affordable Care Act and then expanding Medicaid was actually getting our own tax dollars back. I know there's always these conversations about block grants, and representatives throw them around like it's some panacea and it's going to cure everything. Half the representatives that talk about block grants can't even tell you how they work. And so I always advocated, said, look, if the money's there, let's get it down here and then we'll figure out what we can do with it. I just to show you the tenor of the conversation and how things have become so politicized, our hospital district in Eagle Pass, Fort Duncan Medical Center, they've got a booklet out that they use to kind of talk to representatives, and in there they mention the Texas solution. And when you read it, it really is about expanding Medicaid and more opportunities through Obamacare, but God forbid you were to put that on the literature.
Can't we just call it, Senator Uresti, can't we just call it Abbott Care or Patrick Care? If the issue is the branding, let them have the branding.
Sure.
Absolutely, and we've suggested that, absolutely. That we're leaving hundreds of millions of your taxpayer dollars on the table. We're not leaving, Florida's taking it, California's taking it,
Right.
Other states are taking our taxpayer dollars. And I agree with the representative, call it whatever we want to call it, but bring that money back home and let's put it to use. The other point I think that's worth noting is before Obamacare, the state of Texas hadn't come up with its own plan to help ensure the
Right.
hundreds
Again,
of
this
thousands of
this
kids.
is not a new problem.
Exactly.
But we don't have I have to abruptly shift because our time is limited, but not that abruptly, to education. Senator Uresti, I mentioned that we had spent a lot of money for years and years on education. One of the things about the education system or the school finance system in the state is it always seems to be in court. We always seem to be fighting over whether the system of funding public education is constitutional. And in fact, we're at one of those moments right now where the Supreme Court is considering an appeal by the state of a lower court ruling that says basically we're out of compliance with the Constitution, and it could cost the state as much as $10 billion a year more in public ed funds. Those healthcare dollars we referred to are dollars that, as Representative says, could be spent on other things. One of those things is education. Should we be focused more on education than healthcare? Is that more of a priority, do you think, for this state?
Well, I don't know if it's more priority. It definitely is a top priority, funding education properly. It's an issue we've been dealing with, at least I've been there for 19 years that we've been dealing with. And the solution to the problem can't always be, well, let's just appeal it. Let's just appeal it and let the Supreme Court decide. Because it's going to come right back down to the legislature. We need to step up and be held accountable and show leadership and fix the problem. Now, I'll say, as we all know, Texas is a big state. I don't know that there's a cookie-cutter approach to solving the problem.
Right.
And so you do need to break it down somewhat, but I don't see why we can't come together, bring the stakeholders together, and properly fund once and for all our public education
Is it
system.
only, Senator Uresti, about money? There is this sense that there's a correlation between spending and performance, and people can argue over whether that's the case or not. But at the end of the day, there are non-financial things that the state can do to make the schools better.
Absolutely. It's not always just about throwing more money at the issue. I wouldn't say the problem, but at the issue. We do have to find efficiencies. We do have to hold our teachers accountable and our school districts accountable and our school boards accountable as well. So there are problems that I think
Right.
we can address without throwing more money at the
Do you
issue.
think the schools in your Senate district are doing a good enough job of educating the kids you represent?
I think a number of them are. I have 52 school districts in my district. Part of the problem, though, I would submit to you, and some of them are the school boards. And the school boards, the members, some of those members are not being held properly accountable. But generally, yes. Could they do a better job? Absolutely.
How about in your district, Representative?
I think I represent much less school districts in San Uresti, but I think by and large, they do a really, really good job, sometimes with very limited resources. And you're talking about money issues that really aren't money issues, and I'll give you an example. Here in a neighboring county in Jeff Davis School District, they get an allotment for books. And whether they need, in a school district the size of Jeff Davis, they don't need 300 books. Maybe they need 20. But they get $10,000 to buy X amount of books that they'll never use, and they can't use the rest of that money for something else. And so the way the rules are written, especially for smaller districts, it hamstrings, it doesn't allow the efficiency or the ability to be flexible with the monies that you have. And so we've been looking at, as long as these things continue in court and we keep punting, we're not able to sit down and really craft a solution within a solution, because some things work for Houston ISD, San Antonio ISD, Dallas ISD, but they don't work for Alpine ISD. Some things that work, similar districts that we have, school districts within our respective districts would be like Harlandale, Eagle Pass, Del Rio. They fit a certain size. And then you kind of drop down to these smaller school districts, which, now with all the oil and gas stuff, and they jump into this Chapter 41 status, and they're actually losing money. You have school districts that are minerally wealthy, but their residents are not. And so money leaves the school district, and it doesn't come back.
Representative, we have a new Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath, appointed by Governor Abbott, whose disposition, as many people at the state leadership level have these days, his disposition is local control. We need to not be controlling so much of what happens on education out of the TEA, the Texas Education Agency, or out of Austin. We need to kick that responsibility back to the school districts to set their own course, as long as things are going reasonably well. It sounds like you're a local control Democrat based on what you're saying.
I am, but when it comes to the finance part, it doesn't work. In other words, there's some things that, to me, that local control part, when it comes to finance and funding, that's kicking the can down the road. That's a responsibility. It's a constitutional responsibility given to the legislature, and we should not, kick that can down the road. We should not get out of the way and say, okay, the courts are going to decide every time. I agree with the commissioner on certain things that school districts should be doing, because they apply to the area and what needs to be done in that district. But a lot of times, to me, local control, sometimes we have to save ourselves from ourselves, if that makes sense. And when it comes to the finance part, we have to make the call. I mean, the ball is in our hands, and we have to take care of that business.
Senator Uresti, so let's fan fiction this out here. Let's sort of make up the solution to the Supreme Court case. So they come back and they uphold Judge Dietz in Austin, and suddenly the legislature is on the hook for $10 billion a year or $20 billion a biennium in public ed funding. You can scrape all the waste, fraud, and abuse out of the budget you can. You're not going to get that money without passing a tax bill, which in this legislature is not an easy thing to do. Where are you going to get the money from? If you're told by the courts, gun to your heads, you got to pay more money for public ed, what are you going to do?
See, did you bring your checkbook?
I left it on the plane, but it's a problem, because we have roughly, $8 billion in our rainy day fund, and even if you exhaust that, which we shouldn't, you need to save some of that for a rainy day. It's going to be a challenge, but again, it goes back to being visionaries. Our legislature has to quit thinking 2 years at a time, 2 years at a time. Understand, we can't hold the following legislature. We can't tie them to specific policies, but you have to be visionary. So it's going to be a challenge, and I don't know where you do that, given the fact that, as we know, the price of a barrel of oil has sunk down to $40.
Plus or minus $40, right?
Plus or minus $40. So there are going to be serious challenges, coupled with the fact that our population is continuing to increase, the fastest growing state in the country. So it's a challenge. You're going to have to start talking about, I think everything's on the table. We have a ton of exemptions that we have incorporated over the last couple of decades.
And these are exemptions for, like the high-cost gas exemption, business exemptions that maybe they were right at the time, but maybe now we can look at taking that money back.
Exactly. I think we need to put them on the table and at least have that discussion. What worked back 15 years ago, for example, or 10 years ago, heck, 5 years ago.
Right. You mentioned the price of oil. This is an interesting topic for me. I think in the state of Texas, many of us get up in the morning and the first thing we do is look at the price of oil, because it has an impact on so many other of the conversations we're talking about today. The fact is, when a year ago the price of oil was maybe $60. 2 years ago the price of oil was maybe $100. So we're actually significantly far down. The budget that you all passed in the last legislature was based on assumptions about the health of the economy that in turn were based on assumptions about the price of oil. You actually have less money to spend than you thought you did. Next session in January, you're not going to have as much money as you had last time. Representative Nevárez, Senator Uresti, referred to the $800 million that you allocated for border security. That is not an insignificant amount of money. The Senate wanted 811. The House wanted a little bit more than 500, right?
Less.
Ish.
Less, yeah.
So basically there was a gap. The Senate's view of the world prevailed. You spent 800 million. Was the juice worth the squeeze? Are you getting out of that money what you thought you were going to get out of it, Senator?
I would submit to you no. And what I actually had an amendment to the bill that would call for some accountability as to how we're spending that $800 million. It's a lot of money, and I don't think there's anybody here that doesn't want some type of border security. I was a former Marine, so I understand that. But $800 million to do the job of what a lot of us believe the federal government should be doing, I don't think the juice was worth it.
But your boss, Senator Dan Patrick, the presiding officer of the Senate, I mean, I said these are your bosses really, but your boss in the legislature.
Presiding officer.
Fair enough. Your presiding officer. He would say to you, yes, the federal government's responsibility, and they haven't done jack squat on it. And so as a result of that, because of that, we need to spend this money. And by the way, they should reimburse us. But in the absence of the federal government doing what should be its job, we need to step in.
Well, and again, it goes back to priorities. And border security is a top priority, absolutely. But so is education, so is healthcare. We all have a budget that we have to live within. And you know, I think we were all optimistic that the Eagle Ford Shale was going to last. And
Save us forever, right?
forever,
Yeah.
and we were told for 25 years. I mean, it's still there, but the cost of oil dropped significantly. So we have to step back and quit looking at it from a 2-year plan, which I think is a problem, and we have to be looking 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Because these issues that you've brought out, we're going to be dealing with them in 8 months.
Right. Representative, I know that everyone thinks that Representative Blanco from El Paso is the one in the House who is riding the DPS most to get the data to prove whether that money is right or wrongly spent. You actually have been pretty much on that same train, though, all along. You think that we're not getting adequate data from the state to know whether that money is being well spent.
I do not think we're getting adequate data. I think early on in the process when the bill was coming through committee, I'm the vice chair of that committee that the bill came through, the DPS was using statistics that were the Border Patrol statistics. The other thing that we're seeing as we're going along, and I hope this doesn't bear out, is that any type of crime, if somebody is running a dice game in Alpine, that now becomes a crime that would be considered border crime, related to somehow border security for the indexes. Now, we had a meeting of our interim committee where we learned that they had just spent $78 million. Of the $800 million that was appropriated, you're talking about a year and a half into the biennium, they'd only spent 78. So let's say from that meeting, which was 4 months ago, they've really ramped up spending and spent another 30, which I don't think they've done. They've only would have spent $100 million, so maybe they spend $200 million before we get to the biennium. So we know now that the appropriation was grossly over-appropriated at $800 million. But the problem is going to be and it's a political one that's been caused by this, the sky is falling with respect to the border, is none of these Republican representatives can go back to their constituents or come to the legislature in the 85th and cut the $800 million because they draw a primary opponent that says, hey, Jimmy Joe cut border security. He's not very conservative and he's not a good representative.
Can't you make the argument, Representative, I mean, you don't have a primary, you don't have a general election, so you're not at risk here. And really, Senator Uresti, for all practical purposes, is not either. But the fact is, you go back home, and this is a political issue, right?
Yeah.
As you point out. Are you for border security? You have to say yes. We do polling. We know that border security index is very high among the concerns of people in the state. We know it's an issue. It's as a political matter, it's kind of like over before it starts. You can't oppose, in principle, quote, border security.
And the other thing, Evan, that bothered me, and I know it bothered a lot of sheriffs along the border, is that it's usurped the power of our constitutional law enforcement authority, not just along the border. And if the sheriffs across the state took a look at what's going on and how this works for them, it's taken a lot of power from them. And I would argue to each and every sheriff in every county and say, hey, you need to take and pay close attention to this because we're creating this state army, if you will, and completely cutting out our elected and constitutional law enforcement from the equation. And so you would think, and I use this phrase when we're talking about the budget, sometimes a couple of turnips fall off the back of the truck. Well, when you have 800 million, there's plenty of turnips to fall off the back of the truck, and the ones that are participating the least financially and with manpower are sheriff's departments, and they have a serious beef with that. And so we didn't really take them into account. I mean, I did. You know, I got 12 sheriffs. You know, Senator Uresti has that and some, and I know they've spoken to him about it. But those folks need to get off the bench and get in the game and say, hey, if we're going to be a part of this, we're going to be a part of it.
Do you feel like Representative Nevárez and Uresti, law enforcement back home is not on board with this? They're concerned?
The sheriffs are definitely concerned about it, and I represent about 40% of the Texas-Mexico border. I have 17 counties, mostly rural. Of course, I have Bexar County, San Antonio, but definitely the sheriffs are not completely on board. They feel like they've been left out of the discussions, and there's disagreement about all of that, but nonetheless, that's what they feel, and I think it's appropriate that they should be part of the discussion, because to your point about the local control, I mean, these are the folks that are here, they're homegrown, they know the area better than anybody.
Do you dispute, Senator, that we have a problem on the border? Do you say, nothing to see here, keep walking? The idea that somehow we have border crime or legitimate concerns about people whose provenance we don't actually know, crossing the border, that maybe there are porous areas of the border. We have the most contiguous miles with the Mexican border of any state. This is really a Texas issue more than any other. The argument, you know, coming from the people who run the state right now is we have a real security problem. Do you dispute that?
No, absolutely not. I believe we do have a security problem, and I think, but there's more to it than that. There's the drug issue as well, the drugs that are just pouring into our state as well. So absolutely, we do need to step up, and we have a problem along the border in many regards. I mean, we know the violence that's taking place across the border in certain parts of Mexico. So there is a legitimate, serious issue that we do need to address, but we need to balance that with our responsibility as a state and what it costs the state of Texas with the responsibility of the federal government.
Let's stay with the law enforcement topic broadly, Representative Nevárez. Let me ask you about guns. This was the session in which open carry and campus carry, maybe inevitably, but in any case, definitively passed the legislature. Open carry became legal on January 1st. Campus carry becomes legal on August 1st. Let's take those one at a time. On open carry, Texas was the 45th state to legalize open carry. For goodness sakes, Massachusetts legalized open carry before we did. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal. The difference, though, was that every other state that legalized open carry gave the big cities an opt-out. And in fact, they opted out. Texas has 6 of the 20 largest cities in the country, and those 6 cities have become the largest cities with open carry in the country. Good or bad?
You know, I'm a gun owner. I've got a lot of guns.
And you represent a community that presumably has a bunch of gun owners, right?
I would presume so. But I remember...
Some may be here with their pieces today, in fact.
So, I remember I looked at 2 different variations of the bill, and I'll give it to you in time. Is the day before we got sworn in to the 85th, I'm sitting with a group called Moms Demand, and we're looking at the open carry bill, and I said, look, this is the bill, and I think Dan Flynn had filed that version of the bill. He's representative. And I said, this is a version of the bill that I would support because I think it mirrors concealed carry. And I'm licensed to practice law in Arizona, and they have open carry there, and I don't have a memory of being in Phoenix and seeing people packing, maybe in some of the smaller communities, but it never jumped out at me in those communities. So I told that group, this is the bill that I would get behind on the open carry side. The following day, we get sworn in. I've got my parents and my family there, and these guys bust in, and they have a version of a bill that they call constitutional carry. I call it Wild West carry.
This is unlicensed as opposed to licensed carry. Right?
Exactly, and it's basically unfettered. You can carry your gun anywhere, anytime, unholstered.
And the argument is the Second Amendment is my license, right? We don't need to have a
exactly.
license.
I'm licensed by God via the Second Amendment. That's my license to carry a gun. And so they brought the bill in, and I saw it, and I said, no, I'm not going to vote for that. And that's what I said, and it started a whole brouhaha that continues to this day. And as time went on, of course, that bill didn't go anywhere in the legislature. They tried to get it some momentum and some legs, but the other open carry bill did. And because of what happened to me in my office and what happened to me after the fact, I couldn't in good conscience vote for the open carry bill anymore. And I said, you know what? I look at it like this, Medicaid expansion, which I believe in wholeheartedly. If somebody came in and threatened to kill me if I didn't vote yes for Medicaid expansion, well, guess what? I'm voting no.
On principle, you'd vote no.
I vote no because I wasn't going to play that game. And I don't have any problem with open carry. I think now, as we can see, it's, nothing's really happened. We haven't had any incidents. I don't see anybody walking around. I mean, I might see one of you all walking around with your pistol, and maybe I might walk the other way. I don't know. But campus carry is a different deal, though, I think. And
Well, let me come back to that. Let me ask Senator Uresti. You understand the challenge here for the state. We legalize open carry. One concern that got raised during the session was the problem is not going to be so much the idea of open carry, but the fact that people now are carrying guns who may suddenly be harassed for the fact that they carried guns.
Well, therein lies the challenge, and I live in San Antonio, and I can say that I don't think I've seen anyone walking around.
Right. You represent
open
one
carry.
of those biggest cities in the country now that has open carry. It's not been a factor for you
Right,
yet.
San Antonio, I think now the sixth largest city in the U.S., and I don't think, and I work right downtown. I have an office right downtown. I don't think I've seen anybody. That's not to say it's not going to happen. But one of the challenges is if it's truly open carry, how do you know who's licensed to carry and who's not, and who's going to be harassed or asked to show their license and
Well,
what
but you
all
had,
does
you
that
had an
all
odd,
entail?
Representative Nevárez talked about unlicensed carry as a factor in the last conversation around this. What you had was a weird coalition of grassroots conservatives and non-Anglo Democrats who spoke up in favor of unlicensed carry for the simple reason that if you had licensed carry and you had African American or Latino license holders, but their license was not visible and their gun was, that there might be racial profiling, right? To
Absolutely.
show us your license.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's a legitimate concern?
Absolutely, I think it's a legitimate concern, and I think I hope I'm wrong, but I think that we're going to see instances of that occurring in cities like San Antonio and Houston and Austin.
So we're in a public university campus, right? This is a campus in which campus carry will, along with the other public university campuses, by fiat, be legal on August 1st. Public universities, public colleges got an opt-out, and every one of them so far has opted out. But the legislature voted to legalize campus carry on this campus. Good or bad?
Well, looking around, I think it's a decision that should be left to the campus. I think it's a decision that the school president or with the input from the students should make that decision. I thought A&M, did they opt out?
A&M can opt out. A&M, the thing about A&M in this conversation was the chancellor of the A&M system was the only public university administrator who was sort of okay with it. Everybody else testified, presidents, campus police chief, chancellors, all said we're opposed to it. He was like, if somebody's across the street from campus carrying and then they're on campus carrying, I don't really see what the difference is. Yeah. But no, they're all going to have it on August 1st.
Yeah, I don't think we should have open carry.
Are you
on
worried
campus.
that this campus will somehow, again, this is a rural community, a lot of people are probably gun owners here. What is the material difference if somebody's carrying on Highway 90 off campus and they walk a block over to campus and they're carrying here? What's the difference?
I think the difference is people come here to study. They want to focus on their studies. They want to be listening to the professor. The professor doesn't want to be worried about those issues. He or she wants to be teaching their students, and I think that's the material difference.
Do you worry that there's an academic freedom problem? A lot of the university professors who object fundamentally to this law being put into effect say, I go into class and I teach, and we're trying to have an open environment where we have free-flowing discussion among people who disagree. If it gets heated, all of a sudden now the prospect of there being a gun in my classroom, that may actually tamp down on the ability of people to speak freely. That's what many university professors have said. Do you think there's something legitimate to that?
Absolutely, and again, I was a Marine Corps officer. My son's a Marine, so I'm coming from that community. But
you're not anti-gun.
I'm not anti-gun at all. I have guns as well. But I think in a school environment like this one right now, none of us should be worried about whether or not somebody has a weapon and is angry enough to use it.
Right. Representative, I had the opportunity to meet the DA's niece a few minutes ago before this event, who is going to architecture school, graduate student at UT Austin. Interestingly, the dean of the UT Architecture School just quit over campus carry. He said, I'm taking a job at University of Pennsylvania, and the reason is I don't like the idea of guns in my classroom. It is having an effect in advance, right, on college campuses.
I think it really doesn't advance the safety of the students on campus. I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you how many guns I have. I have a lot. And I don't feel safer because I have a lot of guns. I just have a lot of guns. And so, but I think proliferation of guns, just from even if we weren't pointing them at each other, it's bad. Accidents happen. A gun is a tool that can be very deadly.
But it could be deadly, sir, a block away. It could be deadly.
No, I get that, but I agree with the senator on this part, or for the most part, 100% if you will, is when you cross that street or that block, you're in a different environment. That's why you come to college. That's why you come to the university, because you're coming to a place where you're trying to advance yourself, you're trying to learn something, and I don't believe guns advance the academic mission of any school. And so while maybe a block away or across the street, you know, at the McDonald's, you can carry your piece or lay it on the table, but that's over there. Over here, this is
different environment.
Yeah.
So I'm a parent of a college-age student. My daughter is a freshman at a college out of state, but nonetheless, she's a freshman in college. So I've thought about a lot of this as a parent. Well, how would I feel if my kid went to a public university in Texas under these circumstances? Well, we actually had a terrible tragedy on the UT Austin campus in the last week in which a student was murdered, the first murder on the UT Austin campus in 50 years. And the campus carry advocates are doing a bit of an end zone dance over this, in the sense that they're saying, this proves our case that we need guns on campus. Don't they have an argument to make here that from a public safety standpoint, guns on campus could in a situation like this be a useful tool?
I think, you know, the time since the last homicide that we had, which was the shooting from the tower, tells you that no, I mean, it's a very isolated incident. We don't even know exactly what happened. Obviously, you know, this poor girl is dead and was murdered, but I don't see, you know, I remember sitting in the committee when we were talking about open carry, and I would ask these people that would come testify, I said, show me an example where somebody with a concealed handgun permit has come to save the day. Give me the example. And not one. I remember a guy came and testified, this was his testimony, that his neighbor was getting beat. He was a concealed handgun permit guy. His neighbor was getting beaten in view of him. He had his pistol in the car, and he didn't go out and use his pistol. And he was testifying that open carry would have made the difference. I'm like, how, sir? You're licensed to carry the gun. Why don't you pull your pistol and save your neighbor from a beating? Oh, no, the police are much more better equipped to handle that. I'm like, well, in other words, the testimony was so self-defeating.
You're arguing against yourself.
Yes, and
right.
So you look at your example, Evan, about this is 50 years since the last murder. And that while they may be doing an end zone dance, I think it's sad that they would politicize it, and two, it's too soon to tell what open carry or what campus carry could have done or not done in this situation.
And I think, to add real quick, the assumption is made that just if you did have it, open carry on campus, that people are going to actually do it, and that this young lady would have been carrying a weapon, or that, and
Well,
clearly
the
there
fact
was
is this
nobody
young
else.
lady was a freshman, would not have been of age to be licensed
Gotta be
to carry
21 and do it anyway.
regardless. Let me ask Agnes Varnum, our Director of Events, to put the microphone up here. We'll ask people line up. I'm going to ask one, maybe two more quick questions here of our guys before we ask you to come and join in the conversation. So, Representative Nevárez, what is life going to be like in a year under President Trump?
You know that river that I live along? I might jump to the other side of it.
Well, my understanding is there's going to be a big, beautiful wall, and so you bet to hop over the wall, right, to make that happen.
You know, it's funny is we've got portions of the border wall that Bush 43 built, and I mean you can walk around it. And I tell people, I said, you know, between Carlos and I, we represent the largest swath of border from Brownsville to San Diego, California. You know, from Maverick County all the way to the El Paso County line. There's no more. You can walk, you know, just north of Sanderson, Texas, you could walk a division of men through a canyon, and they wouldn't make noise that you could hear in the next canyon or raise a cloud of dust big enough for you to see it. The border is permeable and it's porous. It always has been. It always will be. And no, there's some impenetrable parts of the border just because you can't cross. And it's not the river. You can wade across the river. And if you're a good enough swimmer where it's deep, you can swim across it. But there's parts over here where you couldn't get through a canyon. If you tried to, you'd be lost for days, and people wander around, they don't make it. But point being is these concepts and these ideas, they appeal to people in Ohio and Pennsylvania and places that are far away from the border that don't understand the geography They don't understand the political history, and they don't understand the economic realities of living in a place like Brewster County.
Senator Uresti, I was over at Marfa Public Radio this morning, and they reported that there were some dissidents in the Border Patrol Agents Union who tried to get the union to not to undo its endorsement of Donald Trump for president, and they were unsuccessful, I think, by 1 vote. So, in fact, we have a situation in which, and this is in El Paso, that the Border Patrol Agents Union has endorsed Donald Trump for president. You stand back from that and you think, am I reading The Onion? Is this actually right? I mean, I understand, different people see the world differently, but this whole campaign has been one bizarre occurrence and news event after another. From your perspective, what are we looking at here? What do you think about this?
Well, I think it's easy to say, you're going to save the world and everybody's problems, and everybody's going to be driving a new car, and I'm going to make big deals. But the practical part of that is not going to work. I just don't see how it works. And to say that you're going to build a wall and you're going to get Mexico to pay for it, just not going to happen. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, let's talk about the real issues. Let's come up with real solutions, and I'll support whoever the president becomes at that time. I'll support that person if they're putting together real solutions to solve our problems.
And not if they're not.
And if they're not,
And you would support such a person if they were Republican or Democrat, and you would oppose such a person if they were Republican or Democrat.
I would, and I would have respect for that person, as I had when President Bush was the president. He was the commander-in-chief, and again, being as a Marine officer, I respected him as
Right.
commander-in-chief. Didn't agree with him all the time.
But you salute smartly, and you do your thing.
Absolutely. I think we should do that, and if we did that, I think Texas does that a lot better in the legislature. Not all the time, but for the most part.
Right.
Certainly better than Washington, D.C. does.
In the absence of anybody up at the mic, I'll ask one more question, but seriously, if there are audience questions, it's okay if there are not, but if there are audience questions, let me encourage you to get up. You are 2 Democrats in a legislature that is dominated by Republicans. Why do you even go to work?
Well, we get that $600 a month. That's
Yes, it is. You get the august sum of $600 a month for your hard work. I mean, there's a point, Representative Nevárez, where I sit back and I go, you don't have enough people in the legislature, Democrats, to prevent something or to do something proactively on your own.
Well,
What motivates you to keep at this?
Being in the House, and maybe it's a little different in the Senate, but being in the House is I have a lot of faith in my colleagues, even though they may be Republicans. A lot of us, we tend to wield or roll the same way on certain issues, and you'd be surprised. There were days where it seemed like there were 4 different parties working on the floor on issues, and sometimes it'd be that the Democrats had the numbers just based on the divisions.
You could ultimately be the decider
Yes,
in the coalitions that form around issues.
And on the weirdest, and you made a point about one of those issues, and I think it was that cross where non-Anglo Democrats were, right in line with very conservative Republicans
On unlicensed carry.
On unlicensed carry.
Right.
But I also have a lot of faith in our speaker, and I think he's done a very good job of being a pragmatic person when it comes to dealing with the things that we actually should be dealing with. And whether he's been under attack by members of his own party, and he gets people running against him for saying he's not conservative. I think the guy's very conservative.
Well, only by the standards of Texas in 2016 is Joe Strauss a liberal.
I mean,
think if you look at what he's done. Let's take questions, as many as we have time for. Ma'am.
Hi there, my name's Renata. I'm the president of the Young Democrats here at Sul Ross. And a common thing that we often talk about in our meetings is actually the affordability of college, for the most obvious reason. We're really blessed at Sul Ross to have one of the lowest state tuitions in the state, but what do you guys do on a state level to make sure that the costs don't continue to rise?
Senator Uresti, there's been my mic is kind of in and out here, I'm sorry. There's been a conversation around tuition increases on college campuses. You're a presiding officer. Not a big fan of the idea of tuition going up. There's been a pushback, but there's also been a declining share of state funding for public ed. What do you do?
Well, it's a big problem. We deregulated tuition. I forget what year.
2003.
Yeah, 2003 when we had a huge deficit of about $10 billion, if I remember correctly, and now we're regretting that. Does that become one of our top issues going into the next legislative session? And I would submit to you, it does. But what's the cost to that. And so it's going to be it's a big problem. You know, we only have so much money in our rainy day fund. We have all these pending lawsuits we haven't even talked about today. There's not enough time to, I realize, but it's an issue. And how much do we require of our students to pay? But what is our responsibility as a state? And are we making it so expensive that families simply can't send their kids to school anymore? And I think we're at that point.
Ma'am.
Okay, hi, my name's Danny. I'm a political science student here at Sul Ross. In the tragic, in the event, unlikely, whatever, that Trump was elected president, does the legislature have in place a plan, or will they put in place a plan to, I guess, trump him from coming into our state and
That's a good one.
and doing anything to our border?
Well, we can't succeed as a state, I mean, from the union. No, I mean,
We've tried.
Remember, there are going to be certain policies from the federal government that we're going to have to follow as a state, which is interesting because the state of Texas likes to sue the federal government when they don't agree with certain policies. So in that event that Donald Trump becomes the president, it'd be interesting to see what policies he would implement that our Attorney General would decide to sue him for.
Representative Nevárez, you don't have an assumption that the state would object fundamentally to a Trump presidency. He'd be governing as a Republican. He would probably be in agreement with more issues with the leaders of the state than not. They probably just all sort of sail along.
I think those guys fall in line. I think there might be some ideological things that rift, if you will, but those are based more on, it wouldn't matter if there was a Republican there or a Democrat. Oh, well, we're going to see if these attacks against the federal government or the encroachment of the federal government have more to do with who's in the White House as opposed to the federal government itself. But I would suspect that they just fall in line.
Right. Sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Oscar Cobos, and I have lived in this community for years. I've been very socially and politically active for the community. First of all, I have just two questions for our state representative and our senator as well. First of all, we're seeing a rise in seems like voter apathy, and also we've got this other end of resurgence of protest, and possibly because of the underrepresentation in certain issues. I wanted to ask the question, from here to the state party convention for both individuals here today, is how will you represent this community with a monster of eminent domain? How will you stand for the people and the water quality? How will you stand today, let it show for the record, against TPP and against everything going on with this abuse of power on eminent domain? I'd like to ask Mr. Nevárez and Mr. Uresti today.
It's great. Let's give him an opportunity to answer that.
We filed an amendment 2 sessions ago. I killed the eminent domain, or I helped kill the eminent domain bill in the 84th. That I believe would have not allowed landowners sufficient notice when they were going to be sued because of a taking. We had some amendments to the bill that we thought the industry would find acceptable. They didn't. They wanted the bill to come through. It died. Unfortunately, eminent domain law, as it stands, is very unfavorable for the situation that's being described in this community regarding TPP. And I lived this experience, and so did Senator Uresti with a coal mine in Maverick County. And frankly, it's very difficult to fight the industry when the regulations are already set up, the industry follows the regulations, and now you're left with individual landowners having to fight off and fend off these eminent domain lawsuits, which I believe have already started with some of the landowners. And I'm very empathetic. Believe me, I don't agree with this wholesale taking of land for this purpose. But I also have to balance the idea that the eminent domain law is written as such that this is how it works. And how we navigate that, how the different communities navigate that. I can tell you one of the things that's happened with the coal mine in Eagle Pass is that I told the community leaders as we kept losing, and I actually represented the county in state court on some of the floodplain issues, and I told them as we kept losing appellate court to appellate court, I said, now's the time for us to start seeing if we can get some concessions, because the mine's here. It's going to be here.
Right.
And so how do you do those things as a community? And I think each community is different with dealing with these types of industries. And that's
Senator, this is another issue on which, weirdly, the grassroots and the left are in alignment. The grassroots complains about liberty being taken away. Well, they're as angry about eminent domain law in many cases as the left is, right?
Exactly. You know, on the private property issue in particular, and I think we're going to see that discussion come up this next legislative session. I mean, it's happening all across the state, and I know it's very delicate and sensitive here in Alpine because of the pipeline, but it's been the law of the land for decades. We've tweaked it a little bit. The representative and I dealt with it in Eagle Pass. I'm dealing with it in San Antonio with landowners along the river, San Antonio River, in the Mission Reach, and how there's a taking, and the folks don't believe there's just compensation, or one, they don't think their land should be taken at all. But as we know, the way the laws apply, it allows these entities to take your land, but then the just compensation issue comes into play, and it's the little guy versus the big guy, and that's been the challenge. And I hope this next session will work on it.
One last question.
I've got to go to the person
Just
behind you. I'm
one.
sorry, out of respect for the
Thank you,
people
Mr.
in line. Sir.
Hi, my name is Gunnar. I'm a political science and history major here on campus, and I'm
Great.
also with the Skyline, the campus newspaper.
Great.
My question is for Representative Nevárez. You've served as the vice chair on the Committee for Homeland Security and Public Safety. You have numerous amounts of bills that come through your committee dealing with campus carry, license to carry, open carry, things like that. My question is simply, what are some things that you or your campaign are doing to create safer campus carry legislation?
Right, so assuming that the legislation is going to be the law, it's going to go into effect on August 1st, how can you work within that context to make it safe for people on this campus?
I think one of the things that we did at the tail end of the last session is we gave the individual chancellors of the systems and the schools the ability to define the policy on campus. I think that's going to be an area of litigation going forward. You're going to see on any number of campuses across the state, you're going to see one or two students suing the university and or the state because of the way the policy has been implemented. I think our committee, should I be on this committee again in the next session, needs to look at how we fix that so that we're not bogged down with more lawsuits regarding the implementation.
Give an example, a practical example. So UT's policy, UT Austin's policy, again, different policies, different campuses. They said guns in classrooms, yes. Guns in dorm common areas, yes. Guns in individual dorm rooms, I believe they said no. So is that something that could be the subject of litigation? Students decide, wait a minute, campus carry means campus carry. It's my dorm room. Why can't I have a gun in my dorm room?
And when you look at it, if you look at it from a practical standpoint, and what the allegation or the complaint is going to be in the lawsuit is, you're making it impossible for somebody to actually carry their gun concealed on campus, because you can have it in this phone booth, but you can't have it over here. And so when you deal with all these issues, for instance, laboratories, a lot of universities have medical facilities attached. Schools like A&M and maybe even here, you might have daycare. And so how do you deal with these issues? And so I believe sooner than later, after August 1st, within a month, you're going to see lawsuits. And you can see plenty of them.
Can I ask you a question about, just before we go to thank you for your good question. So August 1st is the date that the law goes into effect? Typically, laws in Texas go into effect, my understanding, January 1st or September 1st, right?
September 1st.
August 1st, 2016, the law that the campus carry goes into effect is the 50th anniversary of the Charles Whitman shooting at UT. Did nobody know this?
Apparently not.
I keep asking, this is like somebody had to make a decision, since that's not normally a date that a law goes into effect, to make it on that day. Nobody looked at the calendar?
I mentioned to somebody, maybe I know it's because when school starts. School starts on August 20-something. And so I mentioned to somebody, maybe we should move it to the 10th. It's my dad's birthday, so 10th came to me. And they were like, no, 1st, September 1st, August 1st, January 1st. And I said, all right.
Symbolism. Sir.
I'm David Beebe. I'm the Presidio County Justice of the Peace, Precinct 1, and I deal a lot with the jail system in Presidio County. And one of our most often the jailable infraction we encounter is driving while license invalid. And most of those charges have to do with the Texas DPS Driver Responsibility Surcharge Program, which has three big problems in my mind. I'm just wondering if there's a plan to address them. I'll name them. First of all, it essentially creates a debtor's prison system for people who can't pay their bills. It criminalizes not being able to pay. Second of all, it puts an incredible burden on the counties, on the sheriff's officers, on the jails, on me personally, on everybody involved. But the money all goes to the state when it's collected. No money goes back to us for these things, except maybe in the event of reimbursing the county judge for some of her expenses to deal with these things. The third issue is when people call me in my office to ask how they can deal with their surcharges after I process a ticket that they pay for and adjudicate and finish up, I can't give them an answer because the program is so opaque and so impossible to
Right.
navigate. So I'm wondering if there's a plan to deal with that in this next session.
Senator, the justice of the peace describes what is clearly a mess.
It's a problem. So
Right.
typically what happens, real quickly, Evan, is you get a DWI. If somebody gets a DWI, they have to pay a surcharge of $1,000 a year for 3 years. Money goes to the state of Texas. Well, their license gets suspended, inevitably. So they're driving around without a license or a valid license, but yet they got to pay the surcharge. They got to go to work. They got to get their kids to school. And then they get arrested and they end up in the jail. And so it's this vicious cycle that we can't seem to break. And therein lies part of the problem. And I don't remember the exact amount of money that's owed to the state of Texas, but it's a ton of money.
Right.
And some would argue, well, they committed the crime, they should pay for that. And we get that. There was an effort last session by then Representative Sylvester Turner to try to undo that surcharge and alleviate that problem, which when we created it years ago, it was for a good purpose. It was to go to trauma centers. But that money needs to filter back down to the counties to help the jails as well. So it's a problem, one I think we're going to, again, address this next session.
Okay. I'm going to try to get to all three of these, but let's please, quick question, and we'll get quick answers so we can get all three of you.
I
Sir.
can always tell a musician because they adjust the mic up. But a lot of the issues that have come up today show a disconnect between what the electorate on a whole wants and what policies get implemented, particularly in Congress and above. About 86% of Democrats and 84% of Republicans all feel that the vast amount of special interest money that pours into our congressional elections corrupts that process and is threatening our representative government. Do you support a constitutional amendment to remove corrupting money from our political process and ensure free and fair elections for future generations? And if so, as a state representative, do you support a state-based solution to achieve that?
What do we do, Representative Nevárez, on campaign finance? I mean, obviously, this is a huge issue nationally, not just in Texas.
I think number one is if we can't eliminate the special interest groups, we at least need to see them coming. And what that means is there needs to be
Disclosure.
Yes. I mean, there needs to be absolutely no filter between what you, the citizen, sees is affecting and funding and financing these candidates. I mean, there can't be.
So your colleague, Representative Byron Cook, the chair of the State Affairs Committee, now that he's survived his primary, is talking about some kind of an initiative, maybe it's in fact a constitutional amendment, that would, in the next session, that would potentially require disclosure of so-called dark money contributions. These are the undisclosed contributions you're talking about.
You know, I hear opponents of that say that this is an attack on free speech, and they've twisted up the idea of what free speech means so much with the people that support these groups that I don't even think they know what it means. And I just can't understand how if I gave you a campaign contribution, Evan, you decide to run for Carlos's seat, I mean, everyone's going to see that, and everybody should see that. Yet you have groups that are influencing a lot of these primaries, and one group in particular that tried to influence Byron Cook's primary, that spends a lot of money that you have no idea where it's coming from. And there's something wrong with that.
Sir.
I'm Scott Wasserman. I'm on the faculty here at Sul Ross. As you know, higher ed is getting the evil eye again as far as budget cuts. Sul Ross is one of the lowest, if not the lowest paid university in the state. Yet my pre-tax income is eaten up by, or 10% of it is eaten up by property tax. So you're telling me I'm not going to get a raise, but the state is just assuring me that I'm not paying nearly enough property tax. You know, I'm getting it from both ends. So
Right.
when are we going to get some property
We
tax
just had
relief?
an increase in the homestead exemption in the last session, Senator Uresti. A lot of people in your party were not big fans of these tax cuts, given the way that money could have gone to other priorities.
Right.
Do you want to tell this gentleman
Sure.
that we shouldn't be cutting his property taxes?
Well, no, and actually I was one of the few Democrats that voted for that along with the Republicans. And there's a select committee right now that is meeting during the interim, going around the state of Texas, We were in Lubbock. We're going to Houston and Dallas over the next couple of weeks. There was one down in the valley to look at that issue, Professor, exactly how can we try to lower our property taxes, but yet meet all those needs and demands that we've talked about this afternoon.
Is there necessarily a connection? If you lower property taxes, can you pay him more? Or are these separate issues? Okay,
Yeah.
he's on the record, he's just be happy with lower property taxes.
Can you lower tuition, as was asked earlier?
Well, don't ask me. I
Yeah,
don't know
that's,
the
I mean,
answer.
those are the challenges. Y'all are exactly right, and
Right.
therein lies the problem.
That's it. Sir, last question before we head out, sir.
Okay, it may be such that the question is long enough with several parts that you'd publish it and then have.
I'll respectfully ask you to shorten it while you're asking it, but go ahead.
I understand that
Yeah.
each of you support the Trans-Pecos pipeline. How does that square with the tweaking laws of eminent domain? Do you believe they're constitutional? How does that square with your definition of fundamental?
Did we not just have
process?
this question?
We had one similar, but I'm asking for what measurable steps you're prepared to take to do more than tweak the laws of eminent domain, and do you believe a private enterprise should have the same legal governmental rights as a governmental agency in the long?
All right, Senator Uresti, Representative Nevárez, last answers. Let's make them as quick as you want to make them, but again, in response to this question.
I'm going to use a lawyer response. That assumes a lot of facts, not in evidence, in terms of my position on the issue. But you have to walk a very delicate line between what eminent. Imagine if we could not or did not have eminent domain. Are you from Alpine, sir?
I am now.
Okay. Where were you from before?
Buffalo, New York.
Okay. How did you get to Alpine?
Automobile.
Okay. So you drove our fine interstates, right?
That's right.
I assume you probably came down I-10.
Yep.
Okay. If we did not have eminent domain, you would not have been able to make that trip from Buffalo to Alpine.
Hold on, let him answer, please.
And what I'm talking about is it's necessary. And I'm not talking about in this context. Whatever opinion you may have about the pipeline, good, bad, or indifferent, I'm not talking about that. What your question, if I'm correct in reading your question,
I can clarify.
Please don't. Let him answer you. We'll go to Senator
what,
Uresti.
what steps are we doing to do something about eminent domain? And I think I answered that before is I tried, one is, not tried, but we got the bill killed 2 sessions ago. And then the
Please
second.
specifically, what about the bill and what portions
Senator
of it?
Uresti?
Well, real quickly, I know we're out of time.
We are.
We just can't get rid of eminent domain. If that's what you're asking, it's impossible.
No, I'm
We
not
can't-
asking that.
Well, I'm just trying to clarify. If we want to function as a state, I think your question is for private companies taking advantage of the eminent domain. It's a problem that I have, and I think the representative has, and we agree with you 110%. And that's one of the issues that we're going to look at this next legislative session. We dealt with it before with the common carrier bill as well. So I agree with you 110%.
And that was the point of the answer I gave before is that's the problem that I had with the common carrier bill and the eminent domain portion is it allowed a lot of these carriers to step into the shoes of the government. Now, that's not, I can tell you with the legislature that we have and the state elected officials that we have, it's not going away. I mean, there's not enough of us to make it go away. And so until that changes, this is what we're stuck with.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this is a good thing to end on because elections have consequences. And if people are paying attention in this state to the issues, not just this one, but to every other issue, then they should be turning out to vote, they should be civically participating, and ultimately they can maybe get what they want.
And as Evan pointed out, a lot of these people that you would, these issues sometimes have strange bedfellows. You have probably people on the extreme right that would agree 100% with your position. However, they elect people that will vote the other way on it. And so I always ask people this when they come and see me and say, hey, this is my number one issue. And, well, who'd you vote for? Well, I voted for this guy. Well, then that's not your number one issue because you voted for a guy that's going to do something 180 degrees different on it.
We are very fortunate to have had time. We're fortunate to have had time with Representative Nevárez and Senator Uresti. This is a great opportunity for this community. We thank them. We thank President Kibler. We thank all of you for coming, and we'll be back out here again. Thank you very much.